André Rieu, the beloved king of the waltz, a man who brought classical music to millions, filling stadiums with joy and romance, has always been more than a musician. To his fans, he's a storyteller, a dream maker, a reminder that beauty and elegance still have a place in the modern world. But behind the glittering concerts and the radiant smiles, a devastating reality has shaken his family and left his son facing the unthinkable, saying goodbye. In recent months, news of a tragic diagnosis has cast a long shadow over the Rieu household. For decades, André seemed invincible, commanding stages around the globe with his ever-present violin and his radiant orchestra. Yet time, as it does to all, has taken its toll. For his son, who grew up not just with a father, but with a legend who belonged to the world, the diagnosis feels like a cruel betrayal. It's not just about illness. It's about watching a hero, a father, a guiding light, slowly slip away. André Rieu's story has always been one of triumph. A boy from Maastricht who transformed classical music into a global spectacle, turning waltzes into stadium anthems. But now his journey has taken a heartbreaking turn, and his family is left grappling with a future they never wanted to imagine. His son, in particular, has opened up about the pain of preparing for goodbye, even as millions of fans cling to hope. So what really happened to André Rieu? What is this diagnosis that has shaken his family, and how are they coping with the weight of it all? Today, we uncover the truth behind the headlines, and the farewell that has left date to understand why André Rieu's diagnosis feels so devastating. You first have to understand who he is, not just to his family but to the entire world. Born in Maastricht, Netherlands in 1949, André grew up surrounded by music. His father was a conductor, and young André quickly fell in love with the violin. But even as a boy, he sensed that music could be something bigger than dusty concert halls and stiff formal recitals. He dreamed of bringing classical music out of the elite corners of society and into the hearts of ordinary people. That dream seemed impossible at first. The classical world was rigid, resistant to change. But André was stubborn, and more importantly, he had a vision. In the late 1980s, he formed the Johann Strauss Orchestra, starting with just a handful of musicians. Slowly it grew, and so did its ambition. Instead of playing in stuffy venues, Rieu booked arenas, stadiums, and even football fields. He created not just concerts, but spectacles, grand light shows, elaborate stage designs, and a warmth that made every audience feel like family. By the 1990s, his dream had become a reality. Albums like Strauss & Co. and Waltzing Forever turned waltz music into global bestsellers. Crowds in the tens of thousands flocked to see him, waving flags, dancing in the aisles, and even crying as he performed pieces that touched their souls. Critics might have scoffed at his pop classical approach, but the people adored him. He was no longer just André Rieu, the violinist. He was André Rieu, the king of the waltz. And yet, beneath the glittering gowns and grand orchestras, his family always remained his anchor. His two sons, Marc and Pierre, grew up watching their father transform music history. For them, André wasn't just a legend on stage. He was the man who made time for family dinners, who encouraged them to follow their own passions, and who showed them that greatness is built on both discipline and heart. That's why the news of his diagnosis hit so hard. For decades, André seemed unstoppable. He was the smiling face that never faded, the violinist who never missed a note, the entertainer who never let an audience down. His concerts were celebrations of life itself, filled with joy and laughter. To imagine that same man facing frailty, illness, and decline feels like a cruel twist of fate. For his son, the man who had always been a guiding light, suddenly seemed fragile. And the thought of losing him, not just as a father, but as the heartbeat of their family and the millions who love him, was almost too much to bear. This is where the tragedy begins. A global icon whose life has been about uplifting others is now in need of strength himself. And for his son, preparing to say goodbye feels like an impossible burden. His son in tears. For years, André Rieu seemed untouchable. He was touring non-stop, commanding stages across Europe, America, and Asia with the same energy he had in his younger days. Fans marveled at how, even well into his 70s, he performed night after night with a radiant smile, bowing deeply to his audiences as though fatigue or age never touched him. But behind the curtain, subtle changes were beginning to appear. Those closest to him noticed it first. Rehearsals that once felt effortless began to take a toll. He would pause to catch his breath more often or quietly excuse himself when exhaustion crept in. At first, his family chalked it up to the natural wear of age. After all, André had spent decades pouring every ounce of himself into his music. But soon it became clear that something deeper was wrong. The turning point came during a tour rehearsal in Maastricht. André, normally meticulous with his playing, suddenly faltered mid-piece. His hands, once steady as steel, trembled slightly on the violin. The orchestra looked on in silence as he struggled to finish the phrase. For André, a perfectionist who demanded the best from himself, it was a moment of pure shock. For his son, watching from the sidelines, it was terrifying. Doctors were consulted, and after a series of tests, the truth emerged, a diagnosis that would change the course of his life. While the family has not revealed every detail publicly, insiders describe it as a degenerative condition, one that affects mobility and stamina, making long tours and grueling performances nearly impossible. For a man whose entire identity is tied to music, the news was devastating. His son, Pierre, was the first to speak openly about what it meant. In interviews, he admitted that hearing the diagnosis felt like losing a part of his father before the inevitable goodbye. It was like time suddenly sped up, he shared with close friends. We always believed he would be playing forever. And now, forever feels like it's running out. The family tried to put on a brave face, but the reality weighed heavily. André himself struggled with the news. The stage had always been his sanctuary, the place where illness, pain, and even age seemed to disappear. Now, for the first time, it felt like the stage was slipping away from him. His doctors advised slowing down, reducing travel, and preserving his health above all else. But to André, slowing down felt like surrender. For his fans, whispers of the diagnosis began to leak through canceled concerts and postponed tours. Some believed he was simply taking time off, but others feared the worst. The idea of André Rieu, the man who made the world dance, facing illness, was almost unthinkable. And for his son, watching his father grapple with that reality was heartbreaking. The diagnosis didn't just affect André's health. It shook the very foundation of his family's world. For decades, his life and theirs had revolved around the orchestra, the music, and the tours. Now, every plan was uncertain. His son described it as living in the shadow of goodbye, never knowing if the next concert would be the last. This was the moment when Pierre realized that he would have to begin saying goodbye, not in one dramatic gesture, but in small, painful steps. Every performance, every rehearsal, every family gathering suddenly carried the weight of being a possible last time. For a son who adored his father, the pain was almost unbearable, and so the diagnosis wasn't just a medical sentence. It was the start of an emotional journey for André, his family, and the millions who loved him. For Pierre Rieu, life had always been defined by music, but not just any music. It was his father's music, the sweeping waltzes that filled stadiums, the soundtracks to millions of memories worldwide. To the world, André was a legend. To Pierre, he was simply Dad, the man who always managed to be both a superstar and a steady presence at home. That's why the diagnosis cut so deeply. It wasn't just that the world might lose André Rieu. It was that Pierre might lose the man who had always been his anchor. From the moment the doctors delivered the news, Pierre's world shifted. He began looking at every moment with his father differently. A family dinner was no longer routine, it was precious. A quiet afternoon conversation carried the weight of permanence. Even watching André rehearse became emotional, as Pierre found himself wondering, will this be the last time I hear him play like this? Publicly, Pierre kept a brave face, but privately, the cracks showed. Friends and family noticed how emotional he became when speaking about André's health. In one candid moment, he admitted, "It feels like I'm already saying goodbye, even though he's still here. Every day is both a gift and a reminder of what's slipping away." The hardest part for Pierre was reconciling two realities: the unstoppable legend that fans saw, and the vulnerable father he now watched struggle behind closed doors. To millions, André was still the smiling violinist who could fill an arena with joy. But to Pierre, he was a man battling fatigue, sometimes too weak to pick up his beloved violin, his body betraying the spirit that had always seemed unbreakable. And yet, in the face of sorrow, Pierre found strength. Instead of retreating into grief, he chose to honor his father while he still could. He began working more closely with the orchestra, ensuring that the legacy of the Johann Strauss Orchestra would continue long after André could no longer lead it. He saw it as both a duty and a tribute, a way of saying, your life's work will not fade when you can no longer play. This process of preparing for goodbye wasn't just about music, though. Pierre also focused on preserving memories. He encouraged his family to document André's stories, his reflections on decades of music, and his advice for future generations. Late at night, Pierre would sit with his father, listening as André spoke about his childhood, his struggles, and his triumphs. These conversations became treasures, lifelines that Pierre knew would comfort him when the day finally came that his father was no longer there. At times, André's own determination inspired Pierre. Even with his diagnosis, André refused to surrender completely. He insisted on performing when he could, rehearsing even on days when his body resisted, reminding his son and the world that music was not just his career but his very soul. Watching his father's resilience gave Pierre a renewed sense of purpose. Yes, the goodbye was coming. But until then, he vowed to walk beside André, supporting him, celebrating him, and cherishing every moment. For Pierre, the act of saying goodbye was not one single event. It was a gradual, painful process, one that forced him to confront both love and loss in equal measure. Every smile, every laugh, every note of music became part of a long farewell, one that he wished would never end. And in those moments, one truth became clear. André Rieu's legacy was not just the music he created, but the love he inspired in those closest to him. For Pierre, carrying that love forward became the only way to face the heartbreak of goodbye. As André Rieu's family confronts the heartbreak of his diagnosis, one thing has become clearer than ever. His legacy will never truly fade. To the millions of fans who have danced, cried, and celebrated to his music, André is not just a violinist. He is a symbol of joy, romance, and hope. And to his son, Pierre, that legacy is both a comfort and a responsibility. In interviews, Pierre has spoken of the overwhelming support the family has received from fans around the world. Letters pour in daily, stories of weddings where couples dance to André's waltzes, of parents introducing their children to classical music through his concerts, of people who found comfort in his melodies during their darkest days. For Pierre, reading these words is bittersweet. On one hand, it reminds him how loved his father is. On the other, it reinforces the painful truth that one day, the man behind those songs will no longer be there to play them. But Pierre knows André would not want his family or his orchestra to crumble under grief. His father always said that music was meant to outlive the musician. And so, even as he prepares to say goodbye, Pierre is determined to protect the orchestra, the brand, and the dream that André built from nothing. He has quietly begun working behind the scenes to ensure that André's grand concerts can continue, even if one day his father is unable to lead them. "This is not just my father's story," Pierre once confided. "It's the story of everyone who found a piece of their soul in his music." That cannot end. For André himself, the focus remains on gratitude. Despite the challenges of his illness, he continues to share moments of joy with his fans, often appearing on stage with a smile that hides the struggles he faces behind the scenes. Those closest to him say that his greatest comfort comes from knowing that his music has created something eternal, a connection between people that will remain long after his final bow. In many ways, that is what makes this goodbye so heartbreaking. Unlike a fading star who is quietly forgotten, André is still adored, still celebrated, still in demand. His departure, whenever it comes, will not just be the loss of a man, but the end of an era. His son understands this more than anyone, and it is why Pierre's goodbye carries so much weight. He isn't just losing a father. He's losing the heart of a movement, the beating soul of an orchestra that changed the world. Yet even in the sorrow, there is a strange kind of peace. For Pierre, the long goodbye has taught him to treasure every moment, to see each rehearsal, each laugh, and each note of music as a gift. He has learned that while illness may weaken the body, it cannot erase the love and inspiration a person leaves behind. And so, when the day comes that André Rieu can no longer take the stage, his music will still echo across concert halls, living rooms, and wedding dances. His legacy will be carried not only by his orchestra and his fans, but most importantly, by his son, who, even through tears, is determined to honor his father with every step. For now, Pierre says his goodbye in small ways, in whispered words after a concert, in a hand held a little longer, in a look of gratitude across the dinner table. It is a goodbye stretched out over days and months, softened by love, yet sharpened by the knowledge that time is running out. But one truth endures. André Rieu's story will never end. His music will waltz on forever.